What's the name of your dog, Senator Sho, the one in the photo?
Oh, that's Callie.
Callie.
Yeah. Yeah, she was Melissa's 13th foster dog, and ended up staying. I think Melissa's up to 43 now. So,
wow. Right. To everybody who's just joining us, thank you again for joining us. We're gonna wait maybe just 1 minute, and then we're gonna start today's discussion. And by the way, if you ever are thinking about rescuing a dog or adopting a dog or anything that has to do with dog life, make sure to just get in touch with Senator Sho and Melissa, and they'll help you out.
That's right.
Oh, I think, yeah, I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. We have a great subject this morning. We are going to talk about criminal justice legislation. And before that, I want to thank our sponsor for engaging with us this way. Our sponsor this morning is the American Friends Service Committee Arizona, AFSC, organization that works to reduce the size and scope of the punishment system in Arizona using research and documentation, advocacy, and policy reform to advance sentencing reform, halt prison expansion, and improve conditions of confinement. Through research, analysis, and documentation and policy advocacy, the group confronts mass incarceration in Arizona, focusing on, among other things, reframing justice, sentencing reform, halting prison expansion, and of course, privatization, as well as exposing what it describes as the treatment industrial complex. The AFSC Arizona office opened in 1981 in Tucson, Arizona, thanks to the continuing efforts and support of the PIMA monthly meeting. And by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Senator Tj Sho, who serves as vice chairman of several committees in the Senate, including Education, Transportation and Technology, and Health and Human Services committees. He served as the Speaker Pro Tem of the Arizona House of Representatives before joining the Senate, a position he was elected to last year. He represents Legislative District 8. A resident of Coolidge, Arizona, he has long been active in the community. He was born in Florence and graduated from Coolidge High School. He is also a graduate of the Central Arizona College before earning a Bachelor's of Science degree in Political Science from Arizona State University. He, back in the House, he served as the House Ethics Chairman. And of course, he is the son of former Coolidge Mayor Tom Sho and Luz Sho, and he co-owns their family business, which is Shope's IGE Supermarket in Coolidge. Senator Shope, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
Also joining us is Molly Gill, who is the Vice President of Policy for FAM, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that has advocated for sentencing and prison reform for 3 decades. Gill coordinates FAM sentencing and prison reform campaigns in states across the country and works with lawmakers, affected family members, and other criminal justice stakeholders to promote sentencing and prison policies that are cost-effective, protect public safety, fit the crime and the individual, and preserve families. She also serves as a commissioner on the District of Columbia's Sentencing Commission. Molly, thank you for joining us. Also joining us this morning is Rebecca Felk, who was working both the rec services and the legislative arena to address the harm of the prison system in our state. Her work focuses on putting research into humane policy, specifically addressing sentencing structures, racial discrimination, collateral consequences, and public health approaches to end the criminalization of substance abuse disorder. She graduated in 2015 with a Master in Public Administration from the University of Arizona, focusing on nonprofit management and criminal policy. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. I want to play this video that's from AFSC Arizona, sort of a segue to our conversation this morning. And really what we will talk about is what's plausible in Arizona. As you know, there is a great number of bills that are moving through this process. And it's a number that I haven't quite seen in the past. And a lot of people are asking, is this the year for criminal justice reform? Is that a fair conclusion? And so we will talk about what's plausible, but first let me share my screen and play this video. Oh, hold on. I'll make sure the audio is good.
This year, Reframing Justice centered the stories of people currently incarcerated in our legislative advocacy efforts. People inside sent us their stories and calls for change. These are their stories.
We value healing and restoration as means to safer communities.
The problem is that our punishment system does not view incarcerated people as human beings with the potential to evolve and grow. This is particularly true when we sentence children as adults to extreme sentences, like what happened to Veronica.
When I was a child, I was charged and sentenced as an adult to 21 years flat. A super aggravated sentence was imposed. It means that regardless of any positive change I have made since the age of 16, I will not see the outside of prison walls until I have served 21 years. Like most adults, I'm a very different person at the age of 32 than I was at 16. I've demonstrated that people can change. I started by getting my GED and then set my sight on higher education through Rio Salado College. I have an associate's degree in applied science. However, regardless of what I do, the system in its current design does not recognize my growth and will not allow earlier release.
When Veronica looks around her, she sees women doing time well beyond what was needed to grow and change. She is not the same person she was when she arrived in prison as a teenager. She has changed. If you look beyond the orange and DOC number, you might just see a person who has the potential to right what was wrong. We must reevaluate our sentencing structures and earned release credits and open the possibility of extending earned release credits to flat time.
Please support meaningful sentencing reform.
I hope, first of all, that you could actually see that and also you could hear the audio. So this is just one of the stories, of course, that kind of illustrates the problems and potentially what solutions might be offered in the prison arena. But first, I want to ask our panelists about the fact that it's been a year since our prison systems went into a lockdown as a result of COVID-19. I want to ask TJ. TJ, you have a big prison population in your district. What are you hearing from your constituents? And of course, there is now a big conversation about whether it's a good time to reopen the prisons to in-person visits. Why or why not?
Yeah, first off, thanks, Luigi, for having me on. It's an honor to be on with some folks who I think are doing some good work for people who are both incarcerated, and then oftentimes we forget about the families on the outside who deeply care about the people who are within the walls of those systems. So to the question, yes, it's been a year since. I can tell you as a resident in an area where not just where the system is housed, but where many employees, not just officers, but other folks who provide the other care and the other upkeep within the walls are in and out on a daily basis. Yes, it was a very difficult, fearful, I would say, time for many people. There was most definitely a fear, and I think that if you looked at the zip codes of COVID-related diagnoses, diagnoses, especially in the first several months, it's no secret. You looked around at the zip codes that had sites within them, and those zip codes were most definitely higher. And it wasn't all just because of what was happening with the walls. It was also folks coming back home from work in their communities. So in that respect, it's kind of a microcosm of what we see on a daily basis. This time it was COVID, but other times it's these systems are interwoven within the communities that they are located in. And we've started having conversations, obviously in other ways and other things, whether it be education with K-12, or yesterday we had a long conversation on what hospitals look like going in the future. Yeah, we probably do need to make sure that we're having the same conversation, because for the growth of the inmate within that wall, the ability to see somebody who is mindful, who cares about the person within and their personal growth going on is deeply important to make sure that they're able to have contact on a regular basis.
Have you heard from from our corrections officials any kind of indication or suggestion when they might actually be, or whether they are having some serious discussions behind the scenes about
Yeah, Luigi, I know that they are, and I have not heard anything definitive, but it's definitely something that I will continue to monitor, just because of what I said. I do think that you saw it in the video right there, I think for the growth that occurs within somebody, look, either you're going to be surrounded by a negative, or you're going to be at least touched by a positive on a regular basis. And I think that we all would like people to be touched by a positive on a regular basis.
Thank you for that update, Senator. Rebecca, what are you hearing from the ground in terms of the fact that, as I noted earlier, it's been a year now since we locked down our prisons, and I know for a fact that the corrections department, for example, offers like video calls. What are you hearing from folks?
I mean, it's been extremely difficult for directly impacted people and their families with the shifts around visitation. I think many of them understand how important it is to have that public health approach and make sure we're not doing that. But the thing that is frustrating, I think, is that that's not being followed on all sides. We see that there's many issues with contractors who are coming into the prisons. There was outbreaks in Yuma, as well as in one of the Florence prisons, around people coming in for food, the food contract system, who then contracted and potentially brought in COVID that spread through the population. So while there are restrictions that are very important for families to make sure that that's not happening and families aren't getting impacted, we're not seeing that in other areas. So that's one of the reasons we have seen some of these outbreaks. I think it's so important to follow the CDC guidelines around what is healthy and safe. But if that's not applied across the board, it creates a lot of frustration, and the families are the ones who are the most hurt by that.
Right, and of course, our prison systems are not really built for social distancing. They're not built for self-isolation. I mean, it is, you have it's a congregate setting, very confined space, and so if one contracts the virus, then the spread is, it's not just likely; it's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast.
Luigi, if I can jump in on that point, just yesterday I received a really disturbing letter from a mother of a person who's at the Iman facility, and she was talking about how there's one part of the building where they have 50 people in one room, and the room isn't ventilated. They keep putting new people in there, they keep bringing in more bunk beds, so it's this kind of close quartering without the ability to social distance that leads to these outbreaks. And of course, if you're a family member, that's a terrifying prospect for you. And compounded with that is often the inability to communicate with your loved one and find out how they're doing in there. So families have been in incredible distress during this time, worrying about their loved ones. And of course, we need to reopen prisons safely and at the right time and in the right way. But the stress of this is very real for the families and for their loved ones.
Do you know if as you're looking across the country, do you know if other states have started to allow in-person visits?
Well, it's certainly mixed nationwide. Most states have not. It is still video visitations, phone calls, and that's really the only way to stay in touch with families. So we've mostly seen people still under lockdown and no visitation.
Right, and I can sort of understand the hesitation to open up if there are still cases, because as I mentioned, it's confined space, congregate setting. One gets COVID, everybody does, everybody gets it. I always say Representative Sho, Senator Sho.
8 years is hard to get over.
It is hard to get, it's hard to break old habits. As I mentioned, this has been an unprecedented year in which a number of criminal justice bills were heard and passed out of the House, your former chamber. And I want to ask you, of course, you're not in the House anymore, but what's so different this year? Why are we seeing this number of bills actually move through the process?
Well, I would like to think that, I think that is almost a simplistic way of looking at what has happened this year. I know the folks who are also on the Zoom probably thought like I did, that a handful of years ago, whenever Speaker Bowers created a committee to look into this, that would have been the year. And I think it would have been, had it not been for unfortunate decisions based on the that the chairman had made in his past life and continued to make, Mr. Stringer. You go back, I kind of look at a catalyst for a little bit of the thought that maybe things were starting to turn around. It was back in I want to say 2015, 2016. We had another kind of get tough on crime bill that was moving through the chamber, had moved from the Senate over to the House regarding forcing criminal aliens to serve 80% of their sentence instead of that was above and beyond, and that failed in the House. I was one of the no votes on that. I think current Representative Pratt had also voted no. A few others had as well. And that kind of was the first stunning kind of blow to some of this. You later saw some of these things when there were different other mandatory sentence bills that started to fail and things like that, and that ended up being something that made people think about things. Fast forward to this year, Speaker Bowers, still with the same intention of trying to move some of these bills along, creates a committee. Mr. Blackman is the chairman, and he's been very adamant about moving these reforms along. And I know he used to sit right behind me on the floor in the House. He's very passionate about this issue. And we needed to probably find a committee where at least some of these things could be heard. Some of these issues had not been heard for decades within the confines of this building or the building across the courtyard. So that definitely needed to happen. More people begin to look into it. And I will say, look, I know that it's a maligned organization among some circles in the left, but when ALEC began looking into this issue on criminal justice, and granted, from a more conservative point of view of the cost and what we're doing, and for people to be able to be future taxpayers in the system, that really started to make people question what they were doing from a conservative point of view. So there are a lot of factors that have played into this, but they all seem to have come to like kind of a nexus point here.
Oh yeah, and it's really interesting. You mentioned the sort of the intersection from the progressives and from the conservatives. Of course, as you mentioned, the conservatives are primarily looking at this as a fiscal issue. Many think that by spending less, you also kind of you promote the idea of a smaller government, but the goal is the same. And Molly, you've been in this arena for quite some time. Sorry, I didn't mean to date you, but you've been working in this area for a couple of years now. What have you seen in terms of just the the progressives and the conservatives coming together to push toward a common goal?
Well, I think certainly we've seen incredible movement towards this becoming a bipartisan issue. And I think people come at it with different values, but the ultimate value is we all want to be safe. And at the end of the day, we're not safe when we're wasting money on putting the wrong people in prison for too long. We're not safe when we're not helping people who go to prison get the resources and treatment and programming they need so that they come home and they don't return. We're not safe when prison is so destructive of families that marriages can't survive it. These are counterproductive things. And so whether you're coming at this as a person of faith who believes, Jesus commands us to care for prisoners and to do unto them as we would do unto him, or if you're coming at it from a fiscal conservative and you're just thinking, wow, we spend $1.3 billion on corrections in Arizona. That's a lot of money. Maybe we can, spend less money on that. If you're coming at it from a progressive place of seeing this as a human rights issue, as these are people whose rights are often being ignored or violated, and we need to be protective of them. Whatever angle you're bringing to it, I think it all is contributing to greater public safety. We all want these folks who go into our system to come out better than they went in. We all want people to be treated fairly. We all want to make sure that we are safe at night, but we also want to make sure we're not wasting money and the system is cost effective. So I think those are the values that have brought everybody to the table. And I think it's been very helpful that we've seen so many states around the country pass reforms. More than 30 states have reformed or eliminated their mandatory sentences in the last 30 years, for example. We've got other states trying to do that right now. I think that's the trend that this is going towards. I also think it really helped that President Trump signed the First Step Act, which was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress, that had significant sentencing and prison reforms in it. And I think that bill may turn out to be, I hope, certainly sort of a culture changer in the way that both parties talk and think about criminal justice.
Rebecca, I want to go to you. I was just looking at Representative Blackman's bills, and pretty much all of them got out of the House. Most of them have been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee and to the Senate Appropriations Committee. And now I understand assigning them to the probes and to both committees, and to our probes, for example, if there's a financial component to it. What are you hearing in terms of where they're at this point?
I mean, at the moment, we know that they have been assigned, but we have yet to see them on the Senate Judiciary agenda, which is very concerning. We know there's always, so much happening at the legislature every year that there's a lot to happen, but we are trying to get those bills heard. There is an appetite for this in Arizona, and yet there's a lot of other priorities happening around the state. But we need to think about what is happening. As Senator Sho mentioned, this is something we thought might have happened 5-6 years ago, but for some reason, other things keep taking priority. And we can't really understand why, because this impacts everybody from the very ground level. Molly made some great references around what do we value? If we value safety and we actually value community, this is such an important step to take, because the current system doesn't actually create safety for any of us. It actually exacerbates harm. It harms the people who are inside. It harms people who have been victims of crime, who get re-victimized by the system and don't actually see results of what the justice system is offering to them. So I think what we need to do is really open up a conversation and say, how does this impact all of us in all different ways? And I think it's also very important to hear from people who are moving through the system and the families who are, as we already talked about, have been unable to see their loved ones, who are scared every day about potentially their loved one getting COVID, or their loved one has had COVID and has not been treated by the medical system in the Department of Corrections, which has had years of issues. So I really hope that this is something that Chair Peterson and the Senate Judiciary Committee are open to hearing, because this impacts all of us here in Arizona, and it has a ripple effect in all different areas.
Have you heard from the committee's chairman or the committee's members insofar as when this might be scheduled for a hearing?
Not yet. We haven't heard that yet. And we certainly do join this call for Senator Peterson to give these bills a hearing. I mean, some of these bills are actually, I think, quite urgent. One of the bills in his committee is the Prison Oversight Bill, HB 2167 from Representative Blackman. Just last week, the Arizona Department of Corrections got the state slapped with another $1 million fine for refusing to improve prison health care. This is the second $1 million fine the state's been slapped with in 2018. The court documents say that the state could be looking at another $17 million in fines if the Department of Corrections doesn't improve. Just in the first 2 months alone in the Department of Corrections, 2 serious offenders escaped. It took them a week to capture them. We've had water outages. We've been getting reports of inedible food. Jewish prisoners are suing the system, another lawsuit, because they can't get kosher meals. This healthcare lawsuit's already been dragging on for 6-7 years. So these are real urgent matters. These are urgent fiscal matters for the state. The state is looking at paying a lot of money unless things improve dramatically and soon. And these are urgent issues. They can't wait. And there are, of course, humans attached to these issues, and 38,000 families in Arizona who have a loved one inside. And most of those people are coming home someday. Very few people are going to die in Arizona prisons. Most people are going to come back to our communities. So, the sentencing reform bill, the earned release credit reform bill, I think is an urgent matter. Prisons are difficult to operate when they're understaffed and overcrowded, which is very much the reality on the ground in a lot of prisons. You lose staff that way. It's hard to retain staff. Staff morale drops. These are public safety issues. We want prisons to be safe for the people who work there and the people who live there. And right now, they very much are not in that condition. And so I think these issues are urgent, and I do hope the chair will give these bills hearings and votes this year.
So I want to ask Senator Sho real quick, and then I'll go to you, Rebecca. What are you hearing from your colleagues on the Judiciary Committee in terms of when these proposals might be heard, of whether they might be heard at all?
Luigi, well, I've heard that they're all fair game. I mean, I think that Senator Peterson realizes that there are needed reforms. He was in the House for 2 years. Obviously, he worked with Representative Blackman, and on many of these, was majority leader for those 2 years, who controls the floor calendar and was part of that setting of the floor calendar to allow some of these bills that Mr. Blackman and I think Mr. Toma have moved over the last couple of years that ended up going to the Senate. So there is some familiarity there. And I do believe that at the end of the day, we'll end up seeing at least a few of these move on. And I am particularly intrigued by, and I have been supportive of the earned release. I think especially we're talking about nonviolent crime here. We're talking about people who have a stellar record, and I see what one of the questions on the side chat is it radical in comparison to what other states have passed? And I think it's a very Arizona approach to a significant issue that does move the needle forward. And I guess at the end of the day, that's kind of where I'm at. I believe in the politics of the possible, and I want to have some sort of success in something, so that way people have hope of what can happen in the future. And frankly, those small successes oftentimes are the catalyst to prove to folks that the world has not ended, that things have not gotten ridiculously worse out there in with crime rates, etc., things like that. So sometimes you have to take some small steps like that in order to prove out that your theory is correct.
And I always forget that Senator Peterson and you, served in the House just last year, and right. You're absolutely right. I mean, you both work with Representative Blackman, and there is a high level of familiarity with Representative Blackman's work. I want to talk about, let's talk about this specific legislation. I think the big one, of course, is earned release credits. And the idea here is that if you're improving yourself in the prison system, you're not getting into trouble, you're behaving well, you're doing all these things, kind of, prepare yourself to re-enter society, then you earn credits that would allow you to go back into society, perhaps sooner than otherwise has been set. Molly, talk to us about what are you seeing in other states insofar as the states that have implemented earned release credits? What has been the result that you are seeing?
Well, a lot of states for many, many years actually have had far more generous earned release credit systems than Arizona has. Arizona really is unusual in this respect. Arizona, Virginia, and Florida are the only 3 states that in the country that require people to serve a full 85% of their sentences. The federal system also follows that model, and but recently changed that with the First Step Act signed by President Trump, which now has created an earned release credit system where you can earn more time in a home confinement situation if you do programs. So many states for many years have allowed people to earn, a day for a day. You do a day of good conduct, you get a day off your sentence. And that's actually not for doing programming. That's just for good behavior. And then they may have additional earned credit incentives on top of that. So I think even that example gives you a picture of how progressive maybe or generous perhaps other states have been with these earned credit systems, and how far behind the curve Arizona is. People respond to incentives. People, it's not just sticks that people respond to. People want carrots too. And when you tell someone that they can go home sooner if they keep their nose clean or if they do this program, that is a huge incentive. And what we've seen even since the First Step Act passed in Congress is a huge increased demand for programming. More people want to participate in programs. These opportunities excite people inside. And I think also potentially excite people who wouldn't be motivated to rehabilitate themselves otherwise. Everyone wants to go home early. And if you give that as an incentive to people, they're going to do what they need to do to get that carrot.
Rebecca, I want to ask you, well, first of all, you were going to jump into on our discussion previously. What was it that you had in mind?
I just wanted to kind of highlight something that both Molly and Senator Sho mentioned around these bills. When you actually talk, whether it's to a senator or a representative or people who just aren't in this line of work, and you describe what's in these bills, most of them say, oh, we're not already doing that. We're not already allowing people with good behavior to earn time off their sentence. We're not already ensuring that women have the medical needs and the menstrual products they need to manage that inside. We're not doing those. They're shocked. So these bills are not extreme or radical. They are actually very common sense based. And the fact that we have to now go through and codify this, it's very honestly scary around what's happening with the state system around these things. So I think it's just important to highlight that if you actually have a deep discussion of what's in these bills, people are shocked that we're not already doing that.
I want to go to Senator Sho just real quickly. What are the chances of this particular bill actually getting out of your chamber?
Look, I think it's a jump ball. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. That's not my MO, but I think it's truly a jump ball. I mean, the first step is making sure that we get it out of Judiciary. I think appropriations. I think there's that actually is probably a good committee too. Look, ultimately, I want to have this conversation on the floor. I think most of us, it's one of those types of bills that getting out of committee is the hardest stumbling block, because when you get it to the floor, you end up having obviously a majority of both caucuses agreeing with this. And I think that it's one of those many issues, and that Rebecca mentioned, that you talk to people and they truly are serious. We're not doing this already. I mean, and that can be for any number of bills, but this in particular, this subject in particular. And I mean, it's overly simplistic. Molly mentioned as well. I mean, good behavior, bettering yourself, things like that. I mean, these are the things that our parents did for us as children. I mean, to elicit good behavior from their children. I mean, look, I know sometimes we can make things overly simplistic just to help people understand, but at the end of the day, there's really a lot more fact in the simplistic side of this than anything else. We can go ahead and make small changes that will go a very long way.
So you mentioned the main hurdle really is getting out of the committee. And at that point, the presumption then is that there's actually, the presumption is that all the Democrats will vote for it. So you immediately have then that entire caucus voting for it. And in that sense, they only need a handful of Republicans voting for it to get it out of the chamber. But it is your feeling that there's actually a majority, a bigger majority that would support this particular legislation.
I do. I absolutely do. And I think if you look at polling on the subject over recent years, the pendulum has gone in a different direction from, the 1980s and into the 90s. I mean, I think the American people and Arizona citizens are looking for for reforms. Does that mean that they're ready to go ahead and perhaps pass an entire agenda? Probably not. But I think incremental change, and I know that really tees a lot of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle off when I speak of incremental change. But look, I only do that because I'm one of those rascals that's a third generation elected official. I know how I feel like I know how these things work. It takes time. It took a lot of time to get to where we are right now, and it's going to take time to get us to a better place. And I'm willing to put in the time to do that.
The pendulum that you mentioned that has swung from, sort of a tough on crime approach and moving into what the supporters, of course.
And I want to, if I can stop.
Yeah.
Tough on crime does not mean tough on inmates and tough on prison, in my opinion. I think there is a separation there. We send people to prison because, we may have a tough on crime stance on the actual criminal acts, right? But when people go to an institution, it is my expectation that they are also, in addition to serving whatever sentence that they have, being rehabilitated, having some sort of an educational opportunity, being able to be taught a skill that they will be able to use whenever they get out. Because I think it's already been mentioned, the overwhelming majority of the folks who are incarcerated are going to be driving or walking next to us at some point in the near future. So I always make that delineation, but and it may be small to some, but it's a big one for me. So
go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, no, I think to speak to that, and just to be clear, I see many people in the chat who are on the American Friends Service Committee's mailing list, and we send out a weekly newsletter around what's happening at the Capitol. And earned release credits is something we are so encouraged by. We think it's such an important conversation. It's something that is absolutely needed here in Arizona. And we are currently neutral on 2713 because of some of the restrictions that are around the bill. We're just talking here now, and Senator Sho just mentioned, the majority of people who come out or who are in our prison system are going to come out, about 98% of them. And one of the things that we have concerns about with the earned release credit bill is that it's not open to everyone. And if we really believe that people can change and that there is aspects that people want incentives to do better, that should be open to everyone, whether they have been categorized as a, quote, violent offender or not. And I think one of the other things too, and I saw this raised in the chat, but it's very important to also talk about how right now it's tied to programming in the Department of Corrections, not just the good behavior that Molly mentioned is very common in other states. And that's something that's very concerning, especially in the time of COVID, when many of the programs are shut down. And there's also a priority ranking system that's existed in the Department of Corrections for years, where many people do not even qualify to get into programs until the last 3 months of their sentence. So if we really want to talk about rehabilitation and ensuring that people can better themselves to be back in our communities, back with their families, citizens of our state that are engaged, we have to open that opportunity to all. And we see that a little bit restricted in this bill. So it's something that AFFC is neutral on. We'd love to see some shifts around that. But we are so encouraged by the conversation and want that to keep happening.
I wanna talk to you about another major proposal that's moving through the process, or at least it's been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee, is the idea of an oversight committee and an independent corrections ombudsman. Molly, I want to ask you, has this been tried in other states, and what has been the experience in other states?
Yes, it is being tried in other states. It's still a relatively new idea, but it's a very important concept. And Washington State has the ombuds office that this bill was based off of. And that office basically has an independent ombudsman, someone who doesn't have a background in corrections, but is a corrections expert and often a lawyer. And that corrections ombudsman has the power to request documents, data from the from their Department of Corrections, They have the power to go in and talk to people in a confidential setting so they can get candid feedback from both staff and prisoners about what conditions are really like inside. And they also have the power to sort of investigate and help resolve recurring complaints. You know, the same complaint keeps coming up over and over and over again. And they can go in and say, you know, hey, Department of Corrections, we've gotten 15 complaints like this in the last 2 weeks about this facility. There seems to be a problem here. What can be done to resolve it? They write annual reports, they publish those. Everything is very public, very transparent. You know, oversight is really all about improvement. It's not about blame. It's about improving our prison conditions for the people who live in them and for the people who work there. Oversight is just as important for staff as it is for incarcerated people. Other states where we've seen them do this is Ohio. Ohio has an inspections a focus on its oversight body. So that means that the ombudsman can go in, inspect any facility at any time. And this is very important because I'm sure as any formerly incarcerated person will tell you, anytime there's an inspection where the Department of Corrections is given advance notice of it, what happens is the incarcerated people scurry around and they take down the moldy shower curtains and they paint the splotchy places and they get rid of the mouse traps and and then you get this very sort of airbrushed perspective.
It's just a very human tendency, right? You know, somebody's coming into your home, you kind of hide things, put them under the rug, something like that. But
exactly. So independent oversight is really just about accountability and transparency. It's just good government. And when you're spending $1.3 billion on an agency that's responsible for 38,000 lives and frankly constantly getting the state embroiled in expensive lawsuits, I don't think oversight is an unreasonable demand and an unreasonable thing to create.
Senator Sho, I want to ask you the same question. What do you, well, personally, where are you at on this proposal? Show me it goes to the floor.
On this one, it's been, it is a newer proposal, so I'm still studying up what my position should be on it per se, but I will say I've had this conversation with members of the Jude committee. And I've said, look, when we have other issues with agencies, we oftentimes are not bashful about bringing them in for legislative oversight. And I do think that we have potentially and probably been a little derelict in that, that we haven't brought agencies in to answer questions and things like that. It's something that I would like us to do more. It's something that we should be working on. But no, this is a great example of an issue that has come up with this bill that, frankly, for members like myself, who's never served on Jude, to be honest, I just have happen to have what, probably 30,000 or so incarcerated in my district. So I get the anecdotal information from folks who have family members, from people who are, working within the walls in all kinds of different positions. I can tell you, I have family that does. And I hear a lot. So no, this is a very interesting thing. Can't say that I'm committed to it yet because it is truly something that is new to me, but I look forward to learning more about it and frankly, having a conversation with Mr. Blackman about it.
What's your, right now, if I may just ask you a follow-up question, what's your hesitation, at this point about having this kind of an office, this oversight committee?
The fact that I guess mine would be the fact that we don't do it for many other agencies. And I always worry about these things becoming a bureaucratic malaise. Does anything really get solved? We have in other places where we have ombudsman, I sometimes question what is actually being accomplished. So that would probably be one of my hesitations. Do we pay lots of money for investigations that don't seem to change things when we truly do have the ability as a legislative body that we have not exercised, and shame on us potentially for not doing so, to do many of these things ourselves.
Right, and I think you brought up a good point about the legislature bringing in agencies in front of them to kind of make them accountable, for example. And of course, what came to my mind is the fact that you have 1487, right? You believe that the city or a county has done something wrong, you go ask the Attorney General's office, and then of course they have to do an investigation. Rebecca, I want to ask you.
Can I respond really quickly to that?
Go ahead, Mom. Yeah.
I appreciate the senator's comments, and I'm happy, of course, to come talk with you more about this because I agree it is a new idea in the state, and in a lot of places it's still a new idea. What we have seen when we leave oversight to legislatures is, as the senator said, there's a sort of dereliction of duty, not from any ill will, but often they're just busy with other things. In Congress as well, we've been urging Congress to create an independent oversight body for the federal prison system as well, because what we see is even the Congressional U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, they have an oversight hearing for the entire Department of Justice about once a year. And people who are in this system, they can't have oversight once a year. They have problems every single day. Prisons operate 24/7. We need 24/7 oversight. We need people to be able to go in there regularly, come back. And also, it's a big prison system. It's spread out all over the state. HB 2167 would set up an ombudsman's office that could actually have a small staff to go out there and do regular inspections, regular investigations, and I think develop this relationship with the Department of Corrections. I've heard stories from lawmakers who they request data and information from the Department of Corrections and they get silence. And they are actively ignoring lawmakers right now. And if we don't have something that is more invasive, more persistent, I don't think we're going to get the answers that we need. And I think there is going to be continued harm to both the people inside, the staff who work there. We just heard about a very disturbing lawsuit that's being brought by a staff member who was sexually harassed and assaulted. And she made complaints. Management did nothing to address those complaints. So this is about the safety of the people who work there as well. And it's also about taxpayers. How many more $1 million fines do we need before we want to send someone in there on a regular basis and say, come on, are you actually improving things here? The court told you to, are you actually doing it? So that's the kind of consistent feedback that I think oversight and oversight ombudsman would provide. I do agree that there should be more legislative oversight always. And of course, lawmakers will ultimately be the people who decide what happens at the ADC and what kinds of solutions and budgets need to be implemented there. But I do think there's a need for more than just legislative oversight.
So this proposal, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Sorry, and I just want to highlight, in the last month, we've had huge headlines around the Department of Corrections. There was a headline around their data management system, which the taxpayers paid $24 million a few years ago for them to update, that hasn't been working and has kept people who are incarcerated in longer past their release date because that system isn't working. There was the recent increased fines from the Parsons v. Shin lawsuit for the lack of healthcare, and this aspect of sexual harassment that Molly just brought up around the people who work there. And this is all just in the last month. If you want a whole list of what's been going on in the last year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, that's something the American Friends Service Committee has been collecting and keeping track of. So this isn't as though it's an anomaly. This is a consistent issue with a state agency that is the third top spending item in our state. And one of the reasons I think it's been overlooked for so long is because as a society, we have decided that people who are in our prisons have been cast aside and they've been ostracized, put in the shadows. It's one of the reasons that prisons are often in more rural areas, because you don't necessarily, for the majority of the population, have to interact with it every day. And that's one of the reasons we're so thankful for Senator Sho here speaking about somebody who is in that community and hears these stories all the time. But I think when we talk about this and the lack of accountability, it's honestly just devastating. And again, you have these conversations with people and they go, oh, there's nothing to look over that. There's nothing to double check on that. Where is the transparency? Where is the accountability to me as a constituent and taxpayer here in the state of Arizona? So I think it's one of those things that we just have to really take a step back and look at the broader picture and understand how this impacts us, even if we don't live in Florence, even if we don't live in Kingman or Yuma.
So I want to ask just a quick follow-up question about this one, because this proposal, among other things, of course, allows the ombudsman to inspect, corrections facilities. This proposal actually authorizes the ombudsman or the proposed ombudsman's office to have the same access to records, facility staff and inmates as the director of the corrections department. and, to investigate, among other things, abuse or neglect, confinement conditions, even the department's decisions or administrative actions, policies, rules, procedures, or even alleged law violations by corrections staffers. I want to ask Senator Sho, because you mentioned sometimes you look at the ombudsman from the other state agencies and you think, oh, what exactly are they doing here? And I noticed that the one question I have is that does this have sufficient teeth? Meaning to say that this ombudsman's office gets to investigate, they get to file a report, but unlike inspections, let's say from the health corrections department, in which if you violated something, your license could be pulled.
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder if this is going to be just another report that then the corrections department, maybe even the lawmakers, ignore when the report comes out.
Right. No, and I think that's fair. However, I think that we know there's one thing about a report from, say, let's pick the Department of Agriculture, because their sunset review was up this year. That doesn't get any headlines from anybody. I mean, I don't think anybody's talked about that on TV or the newspapers or anything like that. A report from here would obviously garner, I think, all your local, television stations reporting on it, et cetera. And so, it's obviously much higher profile. And I think it was mentioned. I mean, look, when you're talking about something that's around 10% of the state budget, it should be high profile. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
I want to move on to just one other bill, and then I think we're gonna try and answer as many questions that we have from the audience. But the idea of allowing judges to have some level of discretion over sentencing is something that I've seen kind of, that pendulum. I saw that pendulum swing in the direction of, as I mentioned before, kind of tough on crime. You did this issue sentence, the judge really can't do anything about it. And now there are efforts to kind of push that pendulum back, perhaps toward the center, perhaps a little bit more. But I want to ask Molly, are you seeing this across the country, and has other states been successful in kind of pushing that pendulum perhaps a little bit back to the center?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, more than 30 states have reformed their mandatory sentencing structures in the last 30 years. Some states are doing things like creating exceptions to mandatory sentences, where if a person meets certain criteria, the judge doesn't have to impose the sentence. Representative Joel John has a very good bill that would create a similar exception to Arizona's mandatory sentencing scheme. And that bill has passed out of the House with a strong bipartisan vote. I think that one should get a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee and hopefully a Senate floor vote as well. And what we see is when these laws pass, the sky doesn't fall, crime doesn't spike, life carries on pretty much as usual. Some states have gone a lot further. Louisiana just flat out repealed all of its mandatory minimums. It said, we're not doing it anymore. We're letting our judges decide. We're letting our judges look at each individual and try to tailor a sentence that is going to meet that person's needs and that person's culpability and the role they played in the offense. And we're not going to do this one size fits all sentencing anymore. Texas has never really had mandatory minimums. So everybody thinks of Texas as the sort of hang 'em high, tough on crime state, but they've never used mandatory sentences and relied on them. More recently, New Jersey and California are two blue states that are considering repealing their mandatory minimum drug sentences. So I do think that's where the country is going. I think mandatory minimum sentences have been a 30-year experiment that we've tried. And what we found is a lot of arbitrary and frankly, sometimes just irrational and blatantly unjust sentences get handed out to people. It hasn't been this silver bullet that we hoped it would be for crime. Crime has gone significantly down, but there's no real evidence connecting that to mandatory sentences. It's gone down for a bunch of reasons. And sentencing is just one small factor in that. So I also hope Arizona will join that list of states that are reforming their sentences very soon.
Senator Sho, I want to ask you, and then I'll go to Rebecca.
I'm a big fan, by the way.
Yep.
I'm probably actually more in line with Louisiana than anything else. And part of this, I guess, is, in a small fashion, my dad was a justice of the peace for a handful of years. I don't know why we just don't have a computer up there telling us what the sentence is going to be. Basically, at this point, we have people who have studied law, that have been in a courtroom, who have really delved into the minutia of a case, that have heard the evidence, that have applied that evidence to the laws of the state of Arizona. I'm not sure why we're even paying people to do this job right now when we don't actually unshackle them to do their job. So it's a thing I believe in very heavily, is reform on our mandatory sentencing laws.
And I think this one got out of the House with a pretty good majority. What are the chances that this actually, well, let's assume it gets out of the committee. What are the chances of this actually reaching the governor's desk?
Well, I think it'd be just along the lines of the others, I mean, that we're talking about. I mean, all these things are in play. We hope that that we can get a few of them out of the Jude committee. My goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to move the needle in a positive direction here. And I know that for some, it's not going to be enough. And for others, it's going to be too much. But I think that if we wake up the day after session is over and we've sine-died, and we have seen a potential signature on a couple bills that move the needle in a positive direction, I will be pleased. And I know that there's not going to, everybody on this thing, regardless of whether we've moved it at all or just a little bit, nobody's going to give up here. So we're going to continue to have this conversation going forward. So it's going to be something that is perpetual, and we're going to continue to either convince or not. So
I want to ask, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, no, I think just to also address that, that many of these bills, including this judicial discretion one, were moving last year as well. And the whole legislature was uprooted with COVID. So I do believe that is something that would have passed last year had we had a usual session, and not been in a global pandemic. But I think one of the important things, and I really appreciate Senator Shope saying this, that this work isn't done, because even if we did take a Louisiana-based model, it's then important to ensure accountability on individual judges and make sure there's no biases happening. And that's one of the reasons we have elections, and there's a lot of information that people have to be aware of to make informed decisions around that. So I think it's a wonderful step, and the work will not be done. There are still many areas to untangle in the system that have aspects around racial bias, that have it around gender bias, that allow people to get longer sentences based on certain demographics like that. And if we really want to make sure we have a more just system that doesn't impede anybody based on their skin color or anything like that, there's many different steps we have to take. And this is one area where we can move in that now, and we will continue to work on this.
And thank you, Rebecca. We are almost out of time, but I do want to ask just a couple of questions from the audience. One of them is from George. What about the idea of using the state auditor to do the investigation? Presumably, the idea here is that instead of creating a new ombudsman's office, then you just create the auditor staff, or task the auditor staff. They examine, they make recommendation on corrections, and follow up for compliance. What about that idea?
So I actually looked into this. The Auditor General has done 22 performance reviews of the Department of Corrections in the last 36 years. So if we think 22 reviews in 36 years is enough oversight for $1.3 billion a year, by all means, let's maintain the status quo. If we think that we need more transparency, more information on a more regular basis, then we need to come up with a different idea.
Here's another question from, let me just pull it up real quick, from Michael. And he says that getting people out of correction is important. Preventing a return is critical. So he's talking about recidivism. I think, Rebecca, I guess this might be a question you can answer. What is the state doing, or what would you like the state to do to mitigate recidivism for those who have experienced, or for those who are coming out of the prison system?
I mean, I think there's a couple different things that we can do. One is that when we talk about the need for reform in our systems, there's front end, which is sentencing, mitigating, which are things like oversight, the Dignity for Women bill, things like that, and then back end. And we talk about, somebody has served their time, but there are these collateral consequences that hold on to people for for decades, forever, when they have a felony on their record. That can include things like not being able to vote, not being able to get certain housing, not being able to go back to school because of certain felonies on their record. So if we are actually serious about allowing people to come back into our community, we have to stop creating this second-class citizenship for people who have had felony records. We have to be able to say, like, okay, you are back in our community and we want you to succeed. But instead, we have put in multiple systemic barriers that prevent that. If we're really thinking about that, we have to allow people the right to vote. We have to allow them to be able to clear their record after a certain time, which there is a bill introduced by Representative Toma 2320 that allows that. Again, it's restricted for certain convictions, and that's one of the reasons AFFC is neutral on it. But we are so encouraged and excited to see this moving and hope that it gets a hearing in the Senate. And that's really what we need to do. We have to allow people to be successful, not perpetually punish them for a mistake that was made.
Senator Sho, I have just one question for you. A lot of people organize tours, right? Go tour the border, tour schools. I was wondering if that idea has ever come up. It is in your district. We have the biggest population in your district. What about the idea of lawmakers, touring the prisons so that they can see firsthand, see for themselves, even if it's scheduled, everybody knows it's coming, like, what a prison system really looks like from the inside.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, from my personal experience, I don't know that there's a facility in my district I haven't been to. No, I think that's obviously important. I do think that look, when we go to a school, I know what happens before I show up. I mean, I'm sure that the custodial staff has done a very good job and things like that. Or if I go to any other facility, I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. But I mean, but no, I do think that that's important. I do think that once we are able to, in a COVID, less of a COVID world, then that's something that we need to be doing more often. Have led several of those types of things, and we'll continue to do so once we're able to again. One of the things, if I could briefly, we didn't touch on, but it was part of the video, but juvenile, the things that we're doing with juveniles, especially with those long-term sentences as adults, what type of restorative justice we do in there, things like that. I know that's probably a topic in and of itself, but these are all things that are very important to consider as we talk about this stuff. And I understand why Rebecca's organization is neutral on these things. I truly do, but that doesn't mean that things couldn't be more positive going forward in the future with some improvements. And I think that they recognize that too. And we're going to continue trying to have that conversation regardless of where people are signed in on something or not. And I think that if we can make a positive difference, we'll continue to try to do that.
And with that, we are out of time. I just want to thank Molly. Thank you again for joining us. Rebecca, thank you for your time. Senator Sho, thank you for your time. I know how important it is to our viewers and to our listeners. Thank you for spending the morning with us. I hope you learned something. I did. And again, I want to thank the American Friends Service Committee, the Arizona chapter, for sponsoring today's discussion. And as everybody mentioned, this won't be the last time. This conversation is going to be ongoing. It's going to be, these problems are not just going to go away. We're going to keep talking about them. Thank you. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Luigi. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you all for joining.